Let's kick off our next session here. So my name is Andrew Weitz. I'm a program director at the NIH, National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, also known as the NIBIB. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this 45-minute panel session where we'll be talking about federally funded research and development in the wearable space. So we'll be covering a range of topics in this session, things such as what type of wearables R&D is the federal government already investing in, what funding opportunities are available to those who are interested in wearables R&D. What do our panelists, who are each program directors or program managers in different parts of the government, think about, are the major gap areas in wearables R&D, and how can those gaps be filled? And then really anything else that you as the audience are interested in that relates to federally funded wearables research and development. So we want this to be an interactive session. We want the audience to participate by submitting questions directly in the Zoom, and those questions will then be answered by our panelists. So we have three terrific panelists today. I'm going to introduce them each shortly. I'm going to ask them to each give a brief overview of who they are, what federal agency they're representing, and what types of wearables R&D their agency or institute typically funds. And then we're going to open the floor to audience questions, and we'll be spending the bulk of this session having the panelists answer any questions that you may have. So please feel free to begin submitting questions through the Zoom Q&A button. Okay, so time to meet our panelists. Actually, I think you've met one already, Dr. Šeila Selimović, who's been kind of moderating the day. So Šeila is the program manager at BARDA. She's from the Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures, also known as DRIVe. Our second panelist, Dr. Tiffani Lash, is a program director where I work at the NIH NIBIB, and she's part of the Division of Health Informatics Technologies. And then we also have with us Dr. Dana Wolff-Hughes, who is a program director at the National Cancer Institute at NIH from the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences. So why don't we start with you, Šeila? Can you maybe give us a little bit of background about yourself, as well as the BARDA DRIVe division, and then talk a little bit about what type of wearables R&D your agency and division are funding?
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. So as you mentioned, I work at the BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. And within BARDA, we have this division DRIVe, the Division of Research, Innovation, and Ventures, which is essentially the exploration and innovation arm of BARDA. So our mission is to address existing health security challenges through a new lens and to invest in high-risk, high-reward projects. And so several of our programs are designed to de-risk novel technological approaches, including wearables, to conduct pilot studies or test them out in a real-world setting. So with respect to wearables, one of my programs called ENACT, or Early Notification to Act, Control, and Treat, actually focuses primarily on the use of wearable activity trackers and other wearables to continuously monitor physiological signals such as heart rate, respiratory rate, and so on, and attempt to detect early signs of infection. We're primarily trying to actually figure out if it's possible to utilize those wearables to detect infections such as influenza or potentially COVID before symptoms set in, right? So you can imagine if we were able to do that, how powerful that would be, right? A person could potentially decide to stay home if their device tells them, yeah, it looks like you've got the flu. They wouldn't necessarily, be able to spread the infection to other people and so on. So that's a major line of effort. And then at the beginning of COVID, several of the partners within this program have actually been able to pivot from influenza as a major use case over to COVID. And I think that really speaks to the power of the approach, of the agnostic approach that we're using, right? We're developing essentially disease agnostic technologies. We're developing enabling technologies that utilize wearables for health monitoring generally. And then we can decide whether to, apply this specifically to detect influenza or COVID-19, or maybe in the future, some other infections. Moreover, we actually also believe that wearable sensors can be very useful in remote monitoring, for example, monitoring of hospitalized COVID patients. And so actually a colleague of mine here in DRIVe, Dr. Kim Sharetta, has a program in this space, the Rapidly Deployable Capabilities Program, that's evaluating the performance of wearable sensors in assessing infection severity. And she's also furthermore interested in the utility of wearables in detecting and monitoring sepsis. But I would again say that I think the uniqueness or the unique perspective that BARDA and DRIVe bring to the wearables is we're looking at them as a suite of enabling technologies that can be used to detect different infections, different diseases, monitor health more generally. So I think that's really where the innovative approach really lies with us.
Thank you, Šeila. That's really exciting. So we're going to now move over to our two NIH panelists for brief intros. I see one question has come in the chat already, so thank you. Please don't be shy and continue to submit additional questions, which we'll get to shortly. So next we can move to Dr. Tiffani Bailey-Lash, who's a program director at the NIH NIBIB. And Tiffani, maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself as well as the NIBIB and what type of wearables R&D that NIBIB is funding.
Thanks so much, Andrew. My name is Tiffani Bailey-Lash, and I am a program director at the National Institute of Health, specifically the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. So NIBIB is an interesting institute. We call ourselves kind of the fun technology institute. But our goal is to improve health by leading the development and accelerating the application of biomedical technologies. Specifically what we do, we integrate the physical and engineering sciences with life sciences to advance basic research and medical care. One thing that's really important to NIBIB, and I'll go into a little bit about my programs, is that the clinical need drives the technology. So we want to keep that as the focus. There has to be a clinical need that then drives the technology. The two areas or two programs that I manage are point of care technologies as well as digital health. So probably there's some space with wearables, certainly in point of care technologies, but definitely in digital health. So some areas that are of interest to NIBIB, specifically with wearables, that would include those priority areas of interest, such as things that are predictive, digital technologies that automatically capture information to proactively diagnose, manage, or deliver preventative or therapeutic care. Those that are preemptive, those that where the designs are interconnected, intelligent solutions with the result in mind. We want things that are preventative, especially mobile devices that can monitor vital signs, activities in real time, and communicate with personal health records, services, PC, smartphones, the caregivers, and even healthcare professionals. Our goal is personalized care that is accessible to all communities. We also do support some technologies that are appropriate in low resource settings and communities as well. So those, just in a brief nutshell, some of the activities that NIBIB is funding, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Tiffani. And then on to our third panelist, who's also from the NIH, Dr. Dana Wolff-Hughes. Dana's from the National Cancer Institute, and that might seem a little bit surprising. I guess maybe Dana, you can tell us a little about how the wearables fit in with cancer research.
Sure. So as Andrew said, I'm Dana Wolff-Hughes, and I am in the risk factor assessment branch at the National Cancer Institute. And prior to that, I was in the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences within the Office of Director at NIH. And so before I sort of jump into the NCI specific focus, I just sort of want to highlight for everyone that, Tiffani, Andrew, and I represent really a small proportion of the wearables work being done at NIH. NIH has a budget that's over $50 billion, and there's a lot going into technology development across a variety of different spaces. And across NIH, a lot of the community actually collaborates on a lot of these initiatives. So very frequently there are initiatives that Andrew and Tiffani and I and others across different institutes and centers work on. So I'll briefly give an overview of the cancer lens, just because your specific focus maybe isn't highlighted here doesn't mean that that's not being funded at NIH more broadly. So within NCI, we have a history of funding sort of R&D of wearable technology across the cancer control continuum, whether that be prevention, treatment, diagnostics, screening, and we use a variety of different mechanisms. And a lot of those are extramural funding opportunities that would focus on utilizing existing wearables, but there's also some work being done on the development of wearables. And one in particular is sort of the NCI Affordable Cancer Technologies Program. And that work really focuses in low and middle income countries and represents a continuum of technology development from prototyping to clinical implementation. We also fund a lot in the SBIR space, and we partner with individuals across the ICs to award those as well. And in particular, I think with SBIR, we've seen those applications and those awardees sometimes go on to gain other NIH funding as well. And so a really good example of that is Vibrant, who was initially funded by NCI through an SBIR in I think 2012, and now sort of has subawards to All of Us research program and some contracts to do COVID development. And then we have partnerships with other federal agencies as well. One is interagency agreement with NSF called Smart Connected Health that I won't talk too much about because Wendy Nelson will be presenting later. That does a lot of fundamental technology development, but we also have other initiatives as well in which we partner with, say, DoD. Atom HP, for example, is an example where we've collaborated with DoD to develop a platform to objectively monitor fatigue. And then NCI has a long history of developing their own tools and resources for the community. So things like the My Story app, smokefree.gov has a couple of apps like My Quit Guide and Quit Smart as well. And then the branch that I'm in particular has a long history within epidemiology to develop tools and resources as well. And in particular, the automated self-administered 24-hour dietary recall is one of those. That's free to the research community to use. I will note in the fall that ASA 24 will be launching a sleep module as well. And then the other thing that our branch has done a lot of in particular is implementing these wearables in surveillance. So within the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, RFAB sort of pioneered the way through Dr. Rick Troiano to implement a collection of activity via actigraph monitors. That was 2003 to 2006, and then we did that again from 2011 to 2014. So I'll sort of stop there and hand it back over to Andrew.
Great, thank you, Dana. And I see some questions are starting to roll in here. Tiffani, I saw you had your virtual hand up earlier. Was that because you wanted to add something?
No, we can go forward with the questions.
Okay, all right, got it. So, all right, so yeah, thanks to everyone who's submitting questions. We still have 30 minutes, so we should be able to get through a lot of these and have a lively discussion here. So, starting with a question that probably many folks who are from small companies or startups have is, how do they learn? What's the best way to learn what funding is available for these smaller type companies? Is there a single place that they can go where they can see wearables funding opportunities across government agencies, or is it really agency by agency specific? I guess, you know, anyone, since this is really not an agency specific question, anyone who's on the panel who wants to address this, please feel free.
So I'd be happy to jump in. That's actually a really great suggestion. I'm not aware of such an interagency-wide resource, but that's actually a really good idea. Maybe we should develop it. In the meantime, I think what really matters first is understanding each individual agency's mission. You know, BARDA, for example, has a different mission from the NIH, even though we're both part of the Department of Health and Human Services, right? So, for example, you know, NIH tends to do both basic research as well as technology development. BARDA, however, where I work, is much more focused on commercialization in the context of addressing health security needs. So that's a very specific mission. And so we operate primarily with contracts that all can be found on a single government site, which is sam.gov. So that's where all contracts, where all solicitations can be found. And it does take some effort to go through it. But, you know, in the meantime, if anybody's interested in learning more about what the BARDA does in this space, you could just go to our website, reach out to us. We'd be happy to pick up the phone and chat with you.
Thanks, Šeila. And then I guess, how about a kind of analogous perspective from NIH? Where can people go to learn about what NIH funding opportunities might be available?
Well, you know, we do have a general website, grants.nih.gov, but, you know, I think one of the best ways to reach out, or if you want to know, you know, some of the activities that are recent, you know, or want to talk about the research, that's what program officers are for. You know, we are here to, you know, to help assist you in finding funding opportunities, not only directly for the specific areas within your wearable space, but we also have a SBIR office that would be very helpful as well for small businesses to get in contact with, to learn about different funding opportunities that are available.
And I'll just echo what Tiffany was saying. You can go to the NIH guide, like she mentioned, on grants.gov and find specific program and parent announcements and whatnot to potentially apply to. But once you sort of identify the specific health or disease state that you're going to be targeting with your technology, I would highly recommend sort of reaching out to those program directors, either listed as scientific contacts on a particular funding opportunity announcement, or if you happen to know somebody within a particular institute or center, reaching out directly. And I think Tiffani and I have both been in similar situations where there is somebody that contacts us that maybe doesn't fit very well within the work that we're doing, and may be more appropriate to send to even another institute, and we frequently do that as well. So just reach out to a program officer if you have any questions, and they can help sort of guide you for next steps.
Yeah, and I think that also goes in terms of if you're kind of overwhelmed with the different agencies that you can pick from. You know, we have NIH, we have BARDA, DoD funds this type of work. We're going to be hearing from NSF later. It never hurts to reach out to everyone. We're all here to help you figure out, you know, where your project is a best fit and how to apply. So while there may not be a single portal, at least you know, there's only a handful of agencies that fund this work, and so it's worth reaching out. So that question was really, I guess that we answered it broadly, but it was originally asked about for startups and small businesses. What about for larger companies who are doing a lot of this work that are too large to qualify for small business grants? Would be like the SBIR, STTR. What opportunities are available for them to apply to federal initiatives?
One opportunity we had, well, not one, but a opportunity that we have are called academic industrial partnerships. That may be of interest as well, where different, you know, industry partners can partner with academia on specific targeted projects as well. So I would take a look at those types of opportunities that are available.
Additionally, I would, and if you look at different agencies, not just the civilian agencies, many of us operate with contracts, and so really anybody, for the most part, is eligible for those, be it an academic lab, be it a small business, be it a large business. So usually contracts are I think are generally open to pretty much anybody in the United States.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So this one is about sensors that could be implanted within the body. So wearable devices are generally recording from the surface of the body or using sensors to get some penetration through the skin. But what about deeper organs and the signals that those organs carry? Some groups are working on, for example, implantable bladder sensors or bowel sensors. for indications such as treating bladder and bowel incontinence? And how could those be integrated with sensors that we wear maybe on our wrist to work in conjunction together? What programs would be a good fit for this type of research?
So I'll say that I'll leave the NIBIB side of things for Tiffani to answer, but the disease-specific portions of that with the implantables may actually sort of align themselves more with like NIDDK, for example, who does digestion, diabetes, kidney disorder research. I think there's an opportunity to do that depending on sort of whether you come in through a normal sort of investigator-initiated R01, for example, versus SBIR and different calls as well.
And thanks, Dana. So as far as NIBIB is concerned, we are disease agnostic. And so if the platform that you or someone has developed, if it can cross different disciplines, different diseases, usually that's our territory. It would just depend, similar to what Dana said, it may be appropriate for NIDDK. If it's pretty specific, but if it is a platform that's developed that can cross different disciplines, NIBIB would take a look at it.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we've talked about a little bit about how people who are interested can go about finding what opportunities are available. What about all the research that is currently being funded or has been funded before in this space and kind of the impact that this work has made? Can you maybe talk to some of the more impactful projects or programs that you've seen through and how those have really made an impact on the end user in this case, which is the patient?
So I'd be happy to take that question. So, you know, a big part of what makes my job really rewarding is seeing almost the immediate impact on human health, right? That's why we ultimately do what we do, right? That's why we fund this research, because we want to help develop technologies that help improve human health, including by developing these wearables. And so as part of my program, for example, we've funded a company, probably also just mentioned that there's no conflict of interest here, but we funded one company that at the end of their contract with BARDA has collected enough data on wearables use and detecting early signs of infection to be able to obtain the regulatory approval in the European Union. That's called the CE mark, right? So they were able to conduct a pilot study on human subjects. And they showed that the algorithm that they developed in conjunction with their wearable device, a device that's worn around the wrist, can fairly accurately detect early signs of respiratory infection. They weren't necessarily targeting, you know, COVID versus influenza, but I think that alone, right, seeing such a result come up in about a year and a half or so after the beginning of the project is extremely powerful. So, you know, for us, in terms of BARDA's mission, right, commercialization and getting technologies, getting products straight to the end user, that's exactly what we want to see. And for me personally, that was an incredibly rewarding moment.
Well, one thing I can speak to that I'm excited to see more of are multiplex sensors. We recently, for example, supported an effort where it was like an epidermal patch. It detected simultaneously blood pressure, heart rate, levels of things such as glucose, alcohol, lactate, and caffeine and sweat. So, you know, seeing things that aren't just kind of one-ups, you know, seeing multiplex sensors are of interest and excitement of things that I've seen lately. There's also a interest from NIH in general on maternal health. So that's an area where we have, you know, a targeted interest in that space as well.
And I'll say sort of from the broader sort of research perspective, one thing that I sort of inherited from Wendy Nilsson that Tiffani was a program officer for a while was a RFA application that came in to develop a mobile health platform to serve as a resource for the research community. And the goal of that was to develop something that would be cost effective instead of the community sort of developing one-off sorts of platforms and apps for a specific use case, that this would be able to serve as that resource and reduce cost. And what's been really nice about that is it was a multi-IC effort to pull all that together, but that platform has seen a lot of uptick across sort of clinical and research domain spaces. And so that's been really, really fun to watch and see. The other is smart connected health. We've seen a lot of great applications come through over the years. And one of them in particular, they've started very early on with their smart connected health application, focused in sort of sleep and sleep apnea in particular. That was then sort of bought up by a company, and they've since then taken that technology and applied it to different disease states. And so they got money from NIDA, for example, to detect opioid overdose. They've also done some work in NICUs to develop their algorithms around sort of respiratory distress. And so I think that sort of the multi-purpose of the technology and the iterations that we see are also really innovative.
Hey, thanks everyone. Actually, Dana, you just answered another question about using these types of devices for measuring sleep. Thank you there. So we have a question coming in about the different types of wearable devices that can be used in wearables R&D. And I think we typically kind of think of these as either consumer wearable platforms, Apple Watch, Fitbit, et cetera, versus research grade devices. And so I was maybe could have the panel speak a little bit about kind of pros and cons of using each of those types of devices, and what's really appropriate to use in research. And do we ever maybe see these consumer type devices actually becoming research or kind of clinical grade platforms?
So that's a really great question. I love the question. So a couple of thoughts about that. Clearly, the benefit of consumer devices is for the most part, they're comparatively low cost and their wide availability, right? So if one wanted to conduct a large study like BARDA has with a partner called Evidation, they were able to utilize the fact that a lot of people already have Fitbits, already have Garmin's, and so on at home. So for that clinical study, they did not have to purchase new sensors, new wearables, or develop new devices. They simply tapped into a population that already had these devices at home. And so they were able to recruit over 5,000 subjects to participate in a clinical study. I personally think that's incredibly powerful, utilizing tools that are already so widely available. Of course, benefit of research grade instruments is that their accuracy and their sensitivity and specificity may be somewhat higher than the accuracy of a $100 device that's available on the market. May not be true, but it really depends on the type of sensing system. But then again, the question is also, what do you actually want to measure, right? If you have a commercial device, you're limited to the sensors that are already incorporated. Now, if you wanted to, for example, also measure saturated oxygen, right, SpO2, or any other physiological markers that are maybe not necessarily part of a commercial devices, you have to develop a new tool, right? And we've seen this morning, we've heard an excellent talk by Dr. Steve Hsu, who actually developed his own device that does things that, a lot of the other activity trackers cannot do, right? So he's measuring things like cough counts and swallowing mechanisms and so on. A lot of the activity trackers just aren't set up for that. So again, I would say that there are pros and cons. Each study needs to look out for look out for the tool that's best equipped to answer the research question at the end of the day.
Thank you, Šeila. Okay, so we had I guess if people were attending the session before this was a discussion about data security and privacy. Two other kind of related aspects that are important are data sharing, data standards, which are of course important for disseminating the research and the data that is being collected by wearable devices. So why don't we talk a little bit about data standards? Why are data standards important? What kind of initiatives are underway to develop these standards?
I guess I can take that. So I'll say that there are different standards bodies. So ISO, IEEE feeds into that as well to develop standards. There are different standards that are out there. One of them is focused sort of on the mHealth data more broadly. And I'll say sort of standards from my perspective are necessary from the standpoint of being able to pool and integrate this data for larger surveillance efforts. So when I think about sort of what we're currently doing with National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey and just any surveillance system, right now we're having issues with response rates, with people participating and collecting that data. Well, there is a similar sort of trail off that we see with the wearable devices. It's a great way to get information from these individuals. But there's tons of different devices out there, and some of them are research grade, and they'll give you sort of the raw data that you can then use to summarize in different ways. Others are proprietary, and so they're giving you a proprietary step from their device, and all the steps across these devices are not the same, right? So from a surveillance sort of perspective, I think that some sort of standard would be helpful for that. I also know, though, that that may not be achievable. So one of the things that I think about a lot is what can we do to harmonize the data at sort of a basic level to form some sort of summary measures to then map onto different disease outcomes.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, so we've got our data collected and we've got it mapped to a standard, but now what happens to it? Where does it go? How does data sharing kind of fit in here? And really more specifically, when the government approaches setting up maybe a new program in the wearable space, how do you all think about data sharing and either encouraging or requiring data sharing? And then what kind of benefits can that have for other researchers?
I think that's
so go ahead.
So I think it's tricky. I think it depends. We see a lot. There's, at least at NIH, there's an effort to sort of reduce the data sharing guidelines. Some of the institutes have their own policies now for data sharing. There are, I think, broader sorts of issues that we're starting to see, though, with the wearable space in terms of providing all of that data. And at what frequency is it given? What's meaningful? We don't want to just dump things into a repository that aren't meaningful for the broader research community, but also to want to contribute data in a way that sort of maintains the privacy and anonymity of the research participants. And so I think there's a lot of work that's being done there. I think the benefit, though, of increasing data sharing overall, though, taking those things into account, is being able to do some of this fundamental work to understand how to harmonize the data coming from these different sensor streams. I think that there is a lot of work that can be done there to sort of set the stage for standard. Do we need to create a standard in this space, or what is the harmonized output that would be beneficial? I look at it almost, if people are aware of the patient-reported outcomes measurement information survey, so PROMIS, they did this with self-report, right? We need almost like a promise for digital health measures. And so pooling that data and allowing through different research opportunities, people to do secondary data analysis on that can get us closer to that next step.
So just to add a couple of points here, maybe from the BARDA perspective. So it's incredibly important to us, first of all, that personally identifiable data from any study participants be protected. So to us, that's obviously the most important thing. Obviously, we also insist that all research participants are aware how their data is going to be used. Beyond that, the government, we do actually obtain a de-identified data set from all of our studies because we actually do tend to analyze it further on. As research develops and as we develop new questions and new research questions and new hypotheses, we actually like to go back and reanalyze the data and see, can we get more content out of it? We also do often collaborate with other federal agencies because several agencies might look at the same problem from different perspectives. And so when one agency has an excellent data set, another agency might want to share it and say, well, can we analyze it from an entirely different perspective without having to spend money on actually repeating the entire study, right? So to us, that's also kind of an efficiency question, right? Can we collaborate? Can we all work together to develop the best, largest data sets possible, and then answer all of the questions that the different agencies might want to know.
Okay, thanks for those answers. So another kind of big picture type question is, what do you currently see as the top wearable R&D opportunities or priorities, and how are those maybe priorities guided or driven by what the need is for patients right now?
Well, again, I kind of spoke about maternal health being a really big effort push now. And I spoke about multifaceted sensors and technologies being developed. Those are some of the big areas that I know of.
I'll say sort of in the cancer space, we have a lot of wearables, and NCI have supported, the R&D pipeline historically, but sort of uptick in oncology sort of clinical trials broadly. I think Jennifer Goldsack has a paper out sort of demonstrating this, that they found from the playbook. There was recently a NASM report as well last year about sort of the needs in the oncology space. And so I think that there's tremendous sort of opportunities there moving forward.
So I would say from the BARDA perspective, where I personally see maybe the largest opportunity here is looking at wearables as a complement to traditional medical countermeasures, to traditional diagnostic devices specifically, and maybe potentially also as an aid to therapeutic, right? As we've heard today, I think in Dana Lewis's talk, traditional diagnostic devices provide only a picture, a snapshot in time, right? They don't necessarily tell you how your body, how your organism is responding over time. And that information is what we're really trying to tap into through the use of our wearables. And of course, we're utilizing it primarily to detect infection, to help people kind of take agency of their health as well, so they can, make different choices. But I would say, beyond that, I really see the use of wearables most useful in this space of understanding how your body really behaves. How does it respond to any external impact? How does it respond to a pathogen? How does it respond maybe to a particular therapeutic treatment? If you're being given a particular antibiotic, how well does that antibiotic actually work for an individual? So ultimately, I think that kind of personalized medicine view into how a particular body behaves, I really see kind of the most value of wearables in that particular space. Obviously, beyond just tracking your activity levels, if you do sports and whatnot. I really think understanding more our individual biology and seeing how it responds to different cues. To me, that's really the most powerful side of wearables.
Okay, thanks everyone. We've had a couple questions come in now touching on the regulatory aspect here. So one person says, wearables are becoming more and more common for use in remote or virtual clinical trials. Is there a database of reliable verified wearables that are available for use in trials? And then that kind of ties in with another question that came in about, is there any crosstalk or discussion with regulatory agencies on issues surrounding wearables? And the example given here would be, say you're running a clinical trial, you've got wearable devices that are collecting data and you're working on some sort of maybe algorithm to detect something in the data. Maybe it's a machine learning model. And that algorithm you may want to keep updating and improving during the course of the study. And how is that kind of example dealt with from a regulatory perspective? Or if that's maybe too specific to answer, just in general, kind of how do kind of your agencies work with the regulatory agencies in viewing these types of data as they're being used in clinical trials?
So just because BARDA is, again, probably closer to the commercialization stage than much of NIH is, so of course not all, I would say that we work very closely with the FDA, right? Certainly a big push at BARDA is to ensure that our technologies, that our products can ultimately receive regulatory approval, right, when as necessary. So when we work with researchers, we usually have a team on hand that are experts in regulatory affairs. And those folks, first of all, make sure that they're up to speed on any FDA guidances. We also do tend to involve actual FDA staff to provide input. But we also make sure that really any study that we fund is conducted in line with regulatory expectations, right? Because we do want to ultimately seek regulatory approval, right? So we want to maximize, obviously, our funds and our investment. And so every study is set up so that it will ultimately address the questions that if a regulatory agency will want to see addressed. So long story short, yes, we're in very close contact. We definitely make sure that we respond to FDA guidances.
So I'll say, Andrew, there really isn't sort of a government-sponsored repository or listing of sort of these validated devices for specific clinical use cases. I'll point again to Jennifer Goldsack and her team's work at DIME in terms of the playbook and the digital clinical measures. They've partnered with the CTSA's program and doing some landscape analyses to start to get to that. But I'll say sort of NCI has a long history of partnering with FDA in the tobacco space. They collaborated on the development of, I believe it was Quick Guide app. And so there is some precedent for that, and also on smokefree.gov. I'll also say, as FDA moves forward, I know that Bakul has a presentation coming up, and he can speak more to that. I know that there are sort of individual program officers and leaders at NIH who are in contact with Bakul and his team about sort of how to engage and collaborate between not just NIH, but other HHS and federal agencies broadly within this space.
Okay, thanks, Dana and Šeila and Tiffany. So we're actually just about out of time here, and I know we didn't get a chance to touch on all the questions. A lot of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat that we didn't get a chance to answer are about kind of more specific funding mechanisms, or is this agency appropriate for my proposed research? And I would just maybe reiterate the suggestion that was made earlier is, please don't hesitate to reach out to Šeila, Dana, Tiffany, anyone else at a federal agency who oversees a wearables R&D portfolio. That's really our job, is to help you all out and figure out what fits within an agency, and if it doesn't, where else to go. So thanks to everyone for submitting great questions, and a really special thanks to our 3 panelists today. And now I'm going to hand it off to Kim for our next session, which is a stakeholder panel on the future of wearables for health monitoring.